The inquiry room was a clean gray room with a long, pale table and 7 chairs, 3 on each side for the board, 1 at the head for the witness. And the chair at the head was where the surviving bosun was sitting at. 0900. On the morning of the 17th of Talvern, when the duty steward closed the door behind him and slid, the bolt and the lamp above the table came up to its full white burn. Senior Bosun Holcomb Vance set both hands flat on his knees and did not, in the first count of the morning, move. The presiding officer was a flag captain of the Tellurian Lane Service named Brell Anders. Cold gray eyes, clean gray mustache, the long red ribbon of the Lane Cross on his left breast. To his right sat a fleet judge advocate in the dark green of the Verity branch, Pell Lirath, with a folder open in front of her. To his left sat the third officer, a Marine colonel named Drest Valen in dress greens. At the far end of the table sat the Vesca observer, Kev Tolan, a high-caste Vesca Assembly diplomatic intelligence attaché in a long dark coat with the small triple silver pin of an assembly seal at his throat. He had been seated, the bosun noticed, before the Tellurians. "State your full name and rate for the record, please," the judge advocate said. "Senior Bosun Holcomb Vance, ma'am." Tellurian Lane Service, hull complement of the light corvette Times. Hark Weddell, Registry L417, dispatched out of Fenmark Yard on the 11th of Talvern under Captain Edred Holm. Lost with all hands and craft on the 12th of Talvern at approximately 1914 local fleet time in the Brennan Cut, except the present witness. Thank you, Senior Bosun. The board will note the rate. Ma'am, you are aware of the nature of this inquiry. I am, ma'am. You are aware that you are testifying under oath. I am, ma'am. You are aware that you have the right to counsel, and you have declined that right. I have, ma'am. For the record, please state why. The captain is dead, ma'am. The rest of the company is dead. I am the only witness. I will say what I saw. I do not need counsel for that. Pell Lirath wrote one short line in her folder. The flag captain at the head of the table did not move. The Vesca observer at the far end of the table did not move. The Marine colonel folded his hands and watched the bosun the way an old infantry colonel watches a man who has stayed on his feet through a night when a great many other men have not. Senior Bosun Vance, Flag Captain Anders said, we will begin with a series of factual questions. You will answer in your own time. You will not, except where I expressly invite it, offer opinion. You will not, except where I expressly invite it, characterize the conduct of your captain. Do you understand? I do, sir. Very well. The Times Hark Weddell Times was dispatched at 0730 on the 11th of Talvern out of Fenmark Yard, with orders to proceed to Lane Station 8 in the Brennan Cut. Is that correct? That is correct, sir. State the nature of your orders. Picket reinforcement, sir. We were to relieve the Times Tesson Hod, which was overdue for refit, and stand the lane between Lane Station 8 and the inner relay at Telvin for a period of 6 standard days. State the strength of the Times, Hark Weddell. 1 captain, sir. 1 executive officer. 41 company. 4 gun crews of 2 each. 2 engineers. 4 ratings. 1 cook. 1 comm rating. 1 yard chief on the manifest by mistake from a clerical correction at Fenmark. 1 chaplain not aboard at sail. 1 boy of 17 on his first rate from mast yard, who had been transferred at the last bell. Total, 43 aboard, sir, including the captain. 1 short of complement. State the loadout. 2 forward rail mounts of the Verith class type, sir. 2 aft point defense pods. 1 stern missile rack with 8 reloads. Standard. No special purpose ordnance. No augment. No fighter complement. We were not augmented for the run because the run was rated routine. And the Times Hark Weddell. Class. Verith class light corvette, sir. Hull 81 meters. Crew complement 44. Service age 23 years. 2 refits. Last refit at Bren Yard, 6 standard years ago. The class was built for picket and lane keeping, not for ship-of-the-line work, not for sustained engagement. Understood. The flag captain looked down at his folder. He turned a page. Now, state the time of the contact. 1908 local fleet time, sir. We were on the second day of the run. The inner relay at Telvin called the times. Hark Weddell. Zident at 1906. The captain answered 1907. The forward array picked up 2 unscheduled signatures at 1908. Range was 412,000 kilometers. Closing. State the nature of the signatures. Kelvin, sir. Suzerainty fast cruisers. A Velvet class and a Dren class. Twin hull. Both running silent. Both maintaining a closing vector consistent with an intercept of the lane traffic ahead. Of the lane traffic ahead. Be more specific, sir. Ahead of the times, Hark Weddell, on the lane, at a separation of 240,000 kilometers, was a civilian relief lifter. The times Mera, on consignment from the colony of Kessin, carrying 911 adult colonists and 117 children, evacuated from the Kessin ash storm. Her manifest was on the lane traffic board at Fenmark when we sailed. The captain had read it that morning at the chart table. Continue. The Kelvin vector was a closing vector on the times Mera, sir. Not on us. The times Mera. Times did not have escort. 7C. Chryson. The times Tessenhod times had pulled out for refit 4 days early. And the next escort wasn't due at the lane for 31 hours. The lifter was alone. Continue. Captain Holm called General Quarters at 1909. He had me at the bosun's pipe within the half count. I piped the company to their stations. The forward gun crews were at the mounts in 2 minutes 30. The aft point defense crews were at the pods in 2 minutes 10. The engineers were at the rails in 2 minutes flat. The boy from mast was at the comm under the comm rating's elbow. The cook was at the wounded ward with the medic. State the captain's order. He ordered the times Hark Weddell times to interpose, sir. To interpose. Between the Kelvin vector and the times Mera, sir. He ordered the helm to bring the ship up onto a heading that would put us across the line of fire at the optimum range for the Velveth's forward mast driver. He ordered the engineers to spool the rails to full at the cost of the standard cushion. He ordered the gun crews to load the forward mounts with surface burst rounds, rated for hull rather than for cruiser plate. He ordered the comm to broadcast on the lane carrier band, the call sign of the times, Hark, Weddell times, and the standard challenge, in plain Concord. In plain Concord. Sir. Why in plain Concord? So that the Kelvin would hear it, sir. So that the Kelvin would understand that the lane was held. The flag captain wrote one line in his folder. He did not look up. Continue. The Kelvin held their vector. The captain's challenge was answered. At 1911. By a Kelvin transmission, on the same band. The transmission was in Concord, sir, but it was the standard Kelvin lane cease instruction. The Kelvin instructed the times Hark Weddell times to stand off and clear the lane for civilian traffic to be processed by suzerainty officers. To be processed. Sir. Continue. Captain Holm did not stand off. He held the interpose. He ordered the forward rails to fire at 1912 at 190,000 kilometers. The first salvo missed by a wide margin. The Velvet opened with its forward mast driver, at the same count. The first Kelvin round struck the times Hark Weddell times, on the port forward quarter, at 1912 plus 4 seconds. The first round took the port forward mount and the port forward gun crew of 2. The second round, at 1912 plus 9 seconds, took the bridge. Took the bridge. Sir. The bridge separated from the spine on the second hit. The captain was at the helm. The executive officer was at the chart. The comm rating and the boy from mast were in the comm chair under the bridge. I was at the bosun's station, on the lower deck, at the inboard bulkhead of the central magazine, sir. The bridge separation was the last contact I had with the captain. The captain did not speak again after the second round. Continue. At 1912 plus 11 seconds, the Velvet's third round struck the times Hark Weddell times on the central magazine bulkhead. The magazine did not breach. The bulkhead held by a margin of 1 centimeter of bow plate and a fortunate angle of the round. The third round, detonated against the secondary trunk. The secondary trunk fed the aft point defense pods and the stern missile rack. The pods went dark at 1912 plus 15 seconds. The aft battery did not fire again. Cloading. Clon. Clon. The aft battery did not fire again. Sir, state the action of the surviving forward mount. The starboard forward mount, sir, fired 3 more rounds in the 41 seconds following the second hit. The third of those rounds struck the Velvet class on the dorsal mass driver feeder. The Velvet's mass driver stopped firing at 1913 plus 3 seconds. The starboard mount was then taken at 1913 plus 17 seconds by the Dren class's forward fire. The starboard crew of 2 were lost. Continue. At 1913 plus 30 seconds, the Times Hark-Weddell spine separated forward of the engineering bulkhead. The engineering bulkhead held. The engineers stayed at the rails. The engineers continued to feed the rails for the full count of the engagement, sir. They were lost when the engineering bulkhead failed at 1914 plus 02 seconds. The engineering compartment was the last compartment in the Times Hark-Weddell times to die. The engineers did not, in the count from the second hit to the failure of the bulkhead, leave the rails. State the action of the Times Ulm-Mehra. At 1913 plus 1, the Times Ulm-Mehra times came to full burn on her commercial drive. She broke from the lane carrier band onto an unscheduled vector at 104 degrees off lane. She cleared the engagement envelope at 1913 plus 48 seconds. She entered the Telvin inner relay band at 1926. She is, at the time of the present inquiry, sir, docked at Telvin Station 11, with 911 adult colonists and 117 children aboard. All present. All present. All present, sir. The judge advocate set her pen down. The Marine colonel did not move. The flag captain wrote one slow line in his folder. The Vesca observer at the far end of the table sat very still, with his outer fingers folded in front of him on the table, and his triple silver pin glinting once in the lamp. And the Times Hark-Weddell, senior bosun. The Times Hark-Weddell times lost all hands and craft at 1914 plus 02 seconds, sir, when the engineering compartment failed. The hull broke into 3 principal sections. The forward section, with the magazine bulkhead intact, drifted through the engagement envelope and was at last reading on the inner relay band at 1918 plus 30. The midsection broke up. The stern section, with the engineering compartment, drifted through the Velvet's debris field on a vector consistent with the kill of the Velvet class at 1913 plus 3. The Velvet had been hulled by the starboard mount's third round. The Velvet was found dead in the field at 1921 by the recovery cutter times, Lassen times, out of Telvin, and the Dren class. The Dren class held the field for 2 minutes. The Dren class then broke off at 1915 plus 40 seconds on a vector consistent with retreat to Kelvin space. The Dren class did not fire again on the lane. The Dren class did not pursue the Times Ulm-Mehra. The Dren class did not engage the recovery cutter times, Lassen times, when the Times Lassen times arrived at 1921. The Dren class was last reading by the inner relay at 1929 at a range of 940,000 kilometers, falling. And yourself. I was at the bosun's station on the lower deck at the inboard bulkhead of the central magazine, sir. The third hit knocked the bulkhead. The bulkhead held. The third hit knocked me. I was found in the forward section of the hull by the recovery cutter times, Lassen times at 1923. I was the only survivor. How did the cutter find you, sir? I had keyed the bosun's emergency beacon at the inboard bulkhead at 1912 plus 30, before the third hit. The beacon is hardwired to the inboard bulkhead frame. It does not need spine power. It runs on a small dry cell. It broadcasts a single 10-second pulse on the lane emergency band every 40 seconds for 6 standard days, or until the cell dies. The pulse can be heard by any recovery craft on the lane band. The Times Lassen times heard the pulse. The Times Lassen times came. You keyed the beacon at 1912 plus 30. Yes, sir. Before the third hit. Yes, sir. On whose order? I keyed the beacon on my own authority, sir. The captain was at the helm at the moment of the second hit. The captain did not, in the count between the second hit and the failure of the bridge, key any order to the lower deck. The bridge was dark on the lower deck channel at the moment I keyed the beacon. The keying of the beacon was the duty of the bosun, understanding order, 712, lane corvette. In the absence of bridge order, when the ship has taken a bridge hit, I keyed it because the captain was no longer in a position to key it. I keyed it on my own authority. The flag captain wrote one line. The judge advocate set her pen down for the second time. The Marine colonel looked, for the first time, sidelong at the flag captain. The Vesca observer's outer fingers, at the far end of the table, did not move. Senior Bosun Vance, the flag captain said, "We will adjourn for the morning recess. The board will reconvene at 10:30. You will remain in this room. The steward will bring you water and the morning sheet. You will not, during the recess, leave the table or speak with any officer of the board. Do you understand?" "I understand, sir." "Very well." The flag captain closed his folder. The judge advocate closed her folder. The Marine colonel closed his folder. The Vesca observer, at the far end of the table, did not close his folder, because he had not, all morning, opened one. He had been carrying nothing into the room but his eyes and the triple silver pin at his throat. The three Tellurian officers stood, in order. The Vesca observer stood. They went out of the room in order, through the side door, behind the head of the table. The duty steward came in through the front door. He set a glass of water on the table at the bosun's right hand. He set a single folded sheet at the bosun's left hand. He did not, in the small count after, speak. He went out and slid the bolt on the inquiry room door from the inside, the way a duty steward on a board day slid the bolt to keep the corridor traffic quiet. The bosun sat. He did not drink the water. He held the count of his breath against the inside of his ribs. He had served 31 years in the lane service, under 9 captains. He had buried 14. He had carried the bosun's pipe in his coat for the count of those years. And the recovery medic had found it on him in the cradle at Telvin, with the brass clean and the cord wound tight, the way he wound it every morning of his rate. He would not, in the long count of the present inquiry, take it out. He would carry it the way the bosun carried it. He thought of Captain Edred Home at the chart table on the morning of the 11th, with the lifter manifest of the Times Ulm Maritimes under his fingers. The captain had read it twice. He had set it down, when the bosun had come up at 0800 to make the morning report. The captain had looked once at him and said, in his quiet captain's voice, "Bosun, we will keep an eye on her," the bosun had said. At the moment of the first Kelvin signature at 1908, the captain had not hesitated. He had brought the Times Hark Weddell Times onto the interpose at 1909 without consulting the chart and without asking the executive officer's opinion, in his quiet captain's voice, and he had not lifted his hand from the helm. At 10:30 exactly the side door behind the head of the table opened. The 3 Tellurian officers came in order. The Vesca observer came in last. They took their chairs. The judge advocate opened her folder. The flag captain opened his folder. The Marine colonel opened his folder. The Vesca observer did not open a folder. "Senior Bosun Vance," the flag captain said, "the board will resume. The board will, in this session, examine the question of the captain's order to interpose. You will answer in your own time. You will not, except where I expressly invite it, characterize the captain's conduct. Do you understand?" Ender 17. "I understand, sir." "Very well. State the standing orders of the lane service for a light corvette on picket reinforcement in the event of contact with a suzerainty fast cruiser." "Sir." Standing Order 319. Lane corvette. Contact with suzerainty fast cruiser of cruiser tier weight. The standing order is to break contact, signal the inner relay, hold a standoff range of not less than 500,000 kilometers, and await the support of a ship of the line of equal or greater weight. The standing order is not to engage. Not to engage. Sir, the captain's order to interpose was therefore in breach of Standing Order 319. The bosun did not, in the small count after, answer immediately. He held his eyes on the flag captain. He set the count of his breath against the inside of his ribs. He answered, in his quiet bosun's voice, in the cadence of a rate of 31 years. Sir. The captain's order to interpose was in compliance with Standing Order 406, Lane Corvette, contact with suzerainty fast cruiser, engaged on a closing vector against a civilian lifter without escort. Standing Order 406. Sir. State the order. Sir. Standing Order 406. The captain of a lane service hull, on contact with a suzerainty cruiser, engaged on a closing vector against a Concorde civilian lifter without escort, shall, in his own judgment and on his own authority, take such action as he deems necessary to hold the lifter out of the engagement envelope until the lifter has cleared. The order does not specify the action. The order does not specify the engagement envelope. The order leaves both to the captain's judgment. Standing Order 406 is not the operative standing order for a light corvette against a cruiser-tier engagement. Sir. The standing order does not, in its text, restrict the class of hull. The standing order is the operative order of the lane service, whenever a hull of the lane service has a civilian lifter in the envelope. The class of hull is a factor in the captain's judgment. The class of hull is not a restriction on the standing order. The judge advocate wrote 3 lines in her folder. The flag captain looked at the judge advocate. The judge advocate looked up. The judge advocate. The judge advocate. The judge advocate looked up. The judge advocate said, in her quiet judge advocate's voice, "He is, sir." Correct. The flag captain closed his folder, slowly, on the line he had been about to read. He opened it again on a different page. The Marine colonel folded his hands. The Vesca observer at the far end of the table did not move. "Senior Bosun Vance," the flag captain said. "You are familiar with Standing Order 406. "I am, sir." "How?" "Sir. I was the bosun of the Times Tessenhod Times under Captain Holm's father, Captain Vern Holm, in the year I came up to senior rate. He taught 406 on the 3rd night of the long passage between Fenmark and Brennan, at the chart table, with the executive officer present. He read the order aloud, twice, and said the order was the order under which the lane service kept its name in the long count of the centuries, and the order that would, in the end, be the only order the bosun would remember. The captain's son, Captain Edred Holm, was at the chart table that night. He was a midshipman of 19. He remembered it too. He acted on it at 1909 on the 12th of Talvern. The Marine colonel, in his chair on the left of the flag captain, set his hands very carefully on his folder. He did not, in the small count after, speak. The judge advocate set her pen across her folder. She did not write anything more. State the second order the captain gave between the first signature and the first hit. "Sir." At 19:10, the captain ordered the comm rating to log the encounter as lane service action under Standing Order 406. He named the Times Ulmira Times as the civilian lifter at issue, the Velvet class and Dren class as the suzerainty contacts, the engagement vector, the envelope, and the standing order. The log was transmitted in the burst to the inner relay at 19:10 plus 22 seconds. The relay acknowledged at 19:10 plus 41. The acknowledgement reads, "Hark Weddell, Action 406 logged, Telvin relay." The judge advocate, without looking up, said, "We have the relay record, sir." The flag captain looked at her. The judge advocate did not look up. "You have the relay record. It came in on the morning courier from Telvin at 0740, sir. It is in the second packet of evidence. I have it in front of me." The record reads as the senior bosun has stated. The flag captain did not, in the small count after, speak. He turned a page in his folder, slowly. The Marine colonel folded his hands. The Vesca observer at the far end of the table, very quietly, Drew one breath. Senior Bosun, lunch recess. Reconvene at 13:30. Yes, sir. The officers went out. The duty steward came in, set a covered bowl and water at the bosun's right hand, replaced the cold sheet with a fresh one, and slid the bolt. The bosun did not eat the bowl. He thought of Captain Vern Holm at the chart table on the third night of the long passage between Fenmark and Brennan, with the standing order 406 read aloud in the captain's quiet voice, and a midshipman of 19 at the corner of the table, with his face very still in the dim. The standing order had held the Times Ulm-Mera Times out of the envelope. The standing order had cost the Times Hark Weddell. The captain had kept it. The captain had paid for it. The bosun had survived to carry the record of it. At 13:30, the side door opened. The Tellurian officers came in. The Vesca observer came in. They took their chairs. Senior Bosun Vance, the flag captain said. The board has examined the relay record. The record corroborates the captain's invocation of Standing Order 406. The board will not, in the present inquiry, examine the question of the captain's conduct under Standing Order 319. The board will examine the conduct of the Times Hark Weddell's engagement under 406. You will answer in your own time. Do you understand? I understand, sir. Very well. State the count of the engagement. Sir. The engagement opened at 1912 plus 00 seconds, with the first salvo of the forward rails. The engagement closed at 1914 plus 02 seconds, with the failure of the engineering bulkhead. The engagement ran for 2 minutes and 2 seconds. In the count of the engagement, the Times Hark Weddell Times fired 7 rounds from her forward rails, of which the third round of the starboard mount struck the Velvet class on the dorsal mass driver feeder. The Velvet's mass driver stopped firing at 1913 plus 3 seconds. The Velvet was found dead in the field at 1921 by the recovery cutter Times Lassen. In the count of the engagement, the Times Hark Weddell Times did not fire from the aft battery because the aft battery was lost at 1912 plus 15 seconds. In the count of the engagement, the Times Hark Weddell Times did not fire from the stern missile rack because the stern missile rack was lost with the aft battery. State the count of the Times Ulm-Mera exit. Sir. The Times Ulm-Mera Times came to full burn at 1913 plus 01 second. She cleared the engagement envelope at 1913 plus 48 seconds. She entered the Telvin inner relay band at 1926. She is, at the time of the inquiry, docked at Telvin Station 11, with all hands and craft. State the count of the Times Hark Weddell's loss. 42 of the 43 aboard, sir. The 43rd was the present witness. State the count of the Kelvin loss. Sir. The Velvet class fast cruiser at 1913 plus 3 seconds, by the third round of the starboard mount, drifted dead. The Dren class fast cruiser broke off at 1915 plus 40 on a vector consistent with retreat to Kelvin space. One fast cruiser of cruiser tier weight. State the count of the civilian save. 911 adult colonists, 117 children, total 1,028 souls, all present at docking at Telvin Station 11. State the ratio. One of the Times Hark Weddell's company lost for each 24 civilian souls saved, sir, with the loss of 1 Kelvin fast cruiser as a secondary outcome. State the captain's last order. The bosun did not, in the small count after, answer at once. He held the count of his breath. He answered, Sir. The captain's last order, given at 1912 plus 03 seconds, was, Hold the lane. He gave it on the bridge channel. The comm rating logged it. The log, transmitted in the burst at 1912 plus 06 seconds, was received by the inner relay at 1912 plus 25 seconds. The acknowledgement reads, in the relay record, Hark Weddell hold the lane. The judge advocate, without looking up, said, We have the relay record, sir. The flag captain set his pen down. He did not, in the small count after, speak. He looked, for the first time in the long morning, at the senior bosun. The senior bosun held his eyes. The flag captain looked away. "Senior Bosun Vance," he said. "The board will adjourn for the day. The board will reconvene at 0900 on the morning of the 18th of Talvern. You will return to your quarters. You will not, during the recess, speak with any officer of the board or any officer of the lane service. The steward will escort you to your quarters. Do you understand?" "I understand, sir." "Very well. We are adjourned." The Tellurian officers stood. The Vesca observer stood. They went out through the side door. The duty steward came in through the front door and unlocked the bolt. He stood at the door with his cap under his arm. The bosun stood. He set his cap on his head, square. He set the bosun's pipe against the inside of his coat with one finger to feel the brass through the cloth. He went out under the cap of the steward and along the long, pale corridor of the inquiry building of the Fleet Verity Court at Lane Station 11, past the long row of frosted glass doors of the other inquiry rooms, past the marine in dress greens at the gate of the corridor, who came to attention as the bosun passed, and out into the wide gray hall, and out the front door, into the cold gray afternoon of the 17th of Talvern, at Telvin Station 11. With the inland sun low over the long, pale apron of the harbor, and the long, thin row of the lifters at their moorings beyond the apron. And at the far end of the row, with her hatches closed, and her mooring lines slack, and her stern lamps lit against the cold afternoon, the small old commercial hull of the Times Mara, with 1,028 souls in her, alive. The duty steward escorted the bosun to his quarters. The duty steward set the bosun's evening tray inside the door. The duty steward went out. The bosun closed the door. He set his cap on the small steel hook by the door. He took the bosun's pipe out of the inside pocket of his coat, and he set it, with the cord wound tight, on the small steel table by the bed. He did not, in the long count of the evening, polish it. He sat on the edge of the bed with his hands flat on his knees, and he held the count of his breath against the inside of his ribs, and he did not, in the long count of the evening, allow himself anything else. At 08:15 on the morning of the 18th of Talvern, the duty steward came to the door of the bosun's quarters with a folded sheet of paper. The duty steward did not speak. The duty steward handed the bosun the sheet. The duty steward stood at the door with his cap under his arm. The bosun unfolded the sheet. The sheet was the morning sheet of the Fleet Verity Court at Lane Station 11, in the standard Verity branch format, with the day's docket of inquiries on the left and the day's findings on the right. The morning sheet read, under the docket, entry for inquiry 3-114, Harkwettel, loss of hull and company. Interim finding. The board, having heard the testimony of Senior Bosun Holcomb Vance, and having examined the relay records of the Telvin Inner Relay, finds that the captain of the Harkwettel, Captain Edred Holm, acted under the authority of Standing Order 406 in the matter of the closing suzerainty vector against the civilian lifter Mara. The board, accordingly, will not refer the matter to the disciplinary docket. The board will, in further session, examine the question of the conduct of the engagement. The bosun folded the sheet. He set it on the small steel table by the door. He took up his cap. He set it on his head, square. He took up his coat. He set the bosun's pipe in the inside pocket and felt the brass through the cloth. He went out under the cap of the duty steward. He walked the long, pale corridor of the inquiry building in the cold gray morning of the 18th of Talvern, and he came at 0900 to the inquiry room, and the steward slid the bolt behind him, and the lamp above the long, pale table came up to its full white burn. The three Tellurian officers were in their chairs. The Vesca observer was in his chair. The senior bosun took the chair at the head of the long, pale table. He set both hands flat on his knees. He did not, in the small first count of the morning, move. Senior Bosun Vance, the flag captain said. The board will resume. The board will, in this session, examine the conduct of the engagement. You will answer in your own time. You will not, except where I expressly invite it, characterize the captain's conduct. Do you understand? I understand, sir. Very well. State, in your own words, the captain's tactical posture at the moment of the first signature. Sir. The captain held the times Hark-Weddell times on the inboard line of the lane, on a vector consistent with the standard picket reinforcement run, between lane station 8 and the inner relay at Telven. He held the helm on the standard reinforcement vector. He did not, at the moment of the first signature, alter the vector. He held the vector for the count of 1 minute and 02 seconds, while the forward array confirmed the signature. Why? Sir. The captain held the vector to allow the forward array to confirm the signature on the Kelvin profile. The captain did not, in the count of the confirmation, broadcast on the lane carrier band. The captain did not, in the count of the confirmation, alert the times Mera. The captain held the vector silent to avoid alerting the Kelvin to the times Hark-Weddell presence ahead of the confirmation. To avoid alerting the Kelvin. Sir. The Kelvin did not, by the read of the forward array, have the times Hark-Weddell times in their envelope. They had the times Mera. The captain held silent to come onto the interpose before they acquired him. He came onto the interpose at 1909 plus 18. The Kelvin acquired the times Hark-Weddell times at 1911, 2 minutes after. In those 2 minutes, the captain had brought the ship to the optimum range for the Velveth's forward mass driver. The optimum range for the Velveth's forward mass driver. Sir, you mean the optimum range at which the Velveth's forward mass driver could engage the times Hark-Weddell? Sir, that is the optimum range for the times Hark-Weddell times to be hit. Yes, sir. That is also the optimum range for the times Hark-Weddell's forward rails to engage the Velveth's dorsal mass driver feeder. The captain brought the times Hark-Weddell times to that range. The captain took the first hit at that range. The captain took the second hit at that range. The captain's starboard mount took the Velveth's dorsal mass driver feeder at that range. The captain held the times Hark-Weddell times at that range until the engineering bulkhead failed. The flag captain wrote one line in his folder. He did not, in the small count after, speak. The Marine colonel folded his hands. The judge advocate set her pen down. State the captain's conduct on the bridge between the first signature and the first hit. The bosun did not, in the small count after, answer at once. He looked at the bosun's pin at his own left breast. He looked at the cold lamp above the long, pale table. He held the count of his breath. Sir, he said, I was not on the bridge. I was at the bosun's station on the lower deck. I cannot, of my own knowledge, state the captain's conduct on the bridge. You have no knowledge of the captain's conduct on the bridge. Sir, I have the relay record of the captain's 3 orders. I have the comm rating's voice on the bridge channel, which the comm rating transmitted on the lower deck channel for the count of the engagement, as is the standing requirement for general quarters under lane corvette procedure. I have heard, in my own ear, the captain's orders. I have not seen the captain. I cannot, of my own knowledge, state his bearing, his expression, or his posture. I can state what he said. State what he said. At 1909, sir. All hands to general quarters. Bosun, pipe the company. Helm, come to 110, ahead 2/3, hold for the chart. At 19:10 plus 12. Comm, log this encounter as lane service action under 406. Lifter times Mera. Contacts Kelvin, Velveth, and Dren. At 19:11. Comm, broadcast. Hark-Weddell. Lane service. Holding the lane. At 19:12, plus 03. After the first hit. Hold the lane. At 19:12 plus 08, after the second hit, the captain did not speak again. The bridge channel was lost at that count. The burst that carried the captain's last order to the relay was the burst the boy at the comm keyed at 19:12 plus 06, 2 seconds before the bridge separated. The boy held the key for the full burst. The boy did not lift his hand. The Marine colonel, on the left of the flag captain, set his hands very carefully on the table. He did not, in the small count after. Speak. State the captain's tone, sir. The captain's tone was the tone of a captain, at the chart table, on the third night of the long passage between Fenmark and Brennan, in the year he came up to senior rate. The captain's tone did not, in the count of the engagement, alter. The captain's tone at "Hold the lane" was the captain's tone at "All hands" to general quarters. The captain's tone was the captain's tone. The judge advocate looked up. She did not, in the small count after. Speak. The Marine colonel did not look up. The flag captain wrote one slow line in his folder. The Vesca observer at the far end of the table, very quietly, drew one breath. The flag captain closed his folder. Senior Bosun Vance. We will adjourn for the morning recess. The board will reconvene at 10:30. The Tellurian officers stood. The Vesca observer stood. They went out through the side door. The duty steward came in. He set a glass of water at the bosun's right hand. He went out. He slid the bolt. The bosun sat. He did not drink the water. He thought of the boy from mast yard at the comm, under the comm rating's elbow at 1912+06. The boy had come aboard at the last bell on the 11th with his kit bag over his shoulder and his transfer papers in his hand. The bosun had piped him aboard. The bosun had put him under the comm rating's elbow and said, "You sit there. You listen. When she tells you to key the burst, you key the burst. You do not lift your hand from the key until the burst is done. Do you understand?" "Yes, bosun." "Good lad." The boy had not, in the count between his coming aboard and the second hit, slept more than 4 hours. The boy had held the key for the full count of the last burst. The boy had not lifted his hand. The boy had died at his station. At 10:30 the side door opened. The Tellurian officers came in. The Vesca observer came in. They took their chairs. "Senior Bosun Vance," the flag captain said. "The board will resume. The board has one further line of questioning. The board will, in this session, hear the observer of the Vesca Assembly, Attaché Kev Tolan, who has, on the standing courtesy of the Concorde, the right to put one question to the witness. The attaché has indicated to the board that he wishes to exercise that right. The board has granted it. Attaché Tolan, the Vesca observer at the far end of the table, did not, in the small count after, move. He held his outer fingers folded in front of him, on the long, pale table, and his triple silver pin glinting once in the lamp. He did not look at the flag captain. He looked, the way a Vesca of the high caste looked at a witness whose testimony had been heard, at the senior bosun. "Senior Bosun Vance," he said. His Concorde was clean. His Concorde was very clean. "Sir, you have, in the count of the morning, given the board the count of the times Harkwettel's engagement and the count of the times Olmera's exit and the count of the Kelvin loss and the count of the times Harkwettel's loss and the count of the captain's 3 orders and the count of the captain's last order. You have given the board the relay record and the standing order and the bridge channel and the boy at the comm. Sir, you have not, in the count of the morning, given the board your own opinion of your captain's conduct. Sir, the board did not invite my opinion. I am inviting it." The senior bosun, in the small count after, did not answer at once. He looked at the Vesca observer at the far end of the long, pale table. He looked at the flag captain. The flag captain did not, in the count after, gainsay the observer's invitation. The flag captain held his eyes on his folder. The Marine colonel folded his hands. The judge advocate set her pen down. "Sir," the senior bosun said, at last, "my captain held the lane." The Vesca observer did not, in the small count after, speak. He held the senior bosun's eyes. He waited. "Sir," the senior bosun said, "my captain did not ask permission to hold the lane. He held it on the standing order of the lane service and on the long count of his rate and on the third night of the long passage between Fenmark and Brennan, in the year his father read 406 aloud at the chart table to a midshipman of 19 who remembered it. The lifter is in dock at Telvin Station 11 with 1,028 souls in her. The Kelvin have one fewer fast cruiser. The Times Hark Weddle Times is gone. The captain is gone. The boy at the comm is gone. The engineers at the rails are gone. 42 of the 43. The standing order was kept. My captain kept it. That is my opinion of my captain's conduct, sir. The Vesca observer did not, in the small count after, speak. He held the senior bosun's eyes. He drew one breath. He said, very quietly, in his clean Concorde, in the small, clean gray room, with the lamp burning above the long, pale table, the Assembly will, in the long count of the next year, examine the case of the Times Hark Weddle. The Assembly will, in the long count of the next year, weigh the count of the standing order, and the count of the lifter, and the count of the cruiser, and the count of the captain. The Assembly will, in the long count of the next year, reach a finding. The Assembly's finding will not, in the count of the inquiry, be the Board's finding. The Board's finding will be the Board's. The Assembly's finding will be the Assembly's. The two findings will not, in the long count, contradict. I tell you this, Senior Bosun, of my own authority, on the standing courtesy of the Concorde. I tell you this, because you are the only witness, and the only witness deserves to know. Thank you, sir. The Assembly thanks you for your testimony. Sir, the Vesca observer folded his outer fingers and held them. He did not, in the small count after, speak again. He had asked his one question. He had heard his one answer. He had, in his quiet diplomatic intelligence way, given the senior bosun the count of the long year ahead. He sat very still at the far end of the long pale table. The flag captain, in the count after, closed his folder. Senior Bosun Vance. The Board has, on the testimony of the morning and the relay record and the testimony of the present session, examined the conduct of the engagement. The Board finds the conduct of the engagement to have been in compliance with Standing Order 406 and in keeping with the long count of the lane service. The Board will, in the formal finding, so record. The Board will not, in the disciplinary docket, refer the matter. The Board, in adjourning, thanks the senior bosun for his testimony. The Board is adjourned. The flag captain stood. The judge advocate stood. The Marine colonel stood. The Vesca observer stood. The Tellurian officers went out through the side door. In order. The Vesca observer went out last. The duty steward came in through the front door. He stood at the door with his cap under his arm. He did not, in the small count after, speak. The senior bosun stood. He set his cap on his head, square. He set the bosun's pipe against the inside of his coat with one finger, to feel the brass through the cloth. He walked out under the cap of the steward, and along the long pale corridor of the inquiry building of the Fleet Verity Court, at Lane Station 11, past the long row of frosted glass doors of the other inquiry rooms, past the Marine in dress greens at the gate of the corridor, who came to attention as the bosun passed, and out into the wide gray hall, and out the front door into the cold gray afternoon of the 18th of Talvern at Telvin Station 11, with the inland sun low over the long pale apron of the harbor, and the long thin row of the lifters at their moorings beyond the apron, and at the far end of the row, with her hatches open at last, and a long line of dock workers carrying kit bags and small sealed crates across her gangways, and the long thin column of the colonists of Kessin filing down the long open ramp to the receiving hall, the small old commercial hull of the Times Ulm Mera, with 1,028 souls coming home. The duty steward escorted the bosun to his quarters. The duty steward set the bosun's evening tray inside the door. The duty steward stopped at the door, with his cap under his arm. "Sir," the duty steward said, "if I may." "Yes, lad. The yard chief at Mast Yard, sir. He sent word ahead by the morning courier. He asked, if the Board released you, whether you would consent to stand the side at the memorial service for the boy. The boy's mother is up from Kessin by the noon shuttle on the 19th. The yard chief said the memorial would be at 1500 on the apron at mast. The yard chief said he would be honored, sir, if you would pipe the side. The senior bosun did not, in the small count after, answer at once. He held the count of his breath against the inside of his ribs. He looked at the duty steward. He looked at the small steel table by the bed. He looked at the bosun's pipe, with the cord wound tight. On the table. You tell the yard chief, lad, that I will be at mast at 14:30. I will pipe the side for the boy. You tell the boy's mother, when she comes up from Kessin, that her boy was at the comm in the count of the burst that carried the captain's last order to the relay, and that he did not lift his hand. You tell her that her boy was a good lad. You tell her that in those words. Sir. The duty steward went. The senior bosun closed the door. He took the bosun's pipe up from the small steel table. He polished the brass with the soft gray cloth from the small kit drawer under the bed. He wound the cord. He set the pipe back on the table. He sat on the edge of the bed with his hands flat on his knees, and he thought, for one quiet count, of Captain Edred Holm at the helm at 1912 plus 03 seconds, with the Times Mera times still in the envelope and the Velveth's mass driver still cycling, saying, in his father's voice, the only 3 words that were left to be said, hold the lane. On the morning of the 19th of Talvern at 14:30, exactly the senior bosun walked out under the long gray awning of the apron at mast yard, with the bosun's pipe in the inside pocket of his coat. The long line of the company of mast yard was already on the apron. In dress, with the yard chief at the head of the line, and the chaplain at the small portable lectern, and the small gray wreath of cedar at the foot, and the small steel urn on the lectern, with the boy's name engraved on the rim in his rate-book hand. Com rating in training Bren. Holcomb Pell. Of Kessin. Aged 17 years and 4 standard months. In his 19th day of service. The boy's mother stood at the side of the lectern in a long gray coat with her hands folded in front of her. A small, thin woman with the long gray scarf of a Kessin colonist wound once around her throat. She had come up that morning on the noon shuttle. At the gangway, she had looked once at the senior bosun under his cap and said, Bosun, ma'am, you knew my boy. Yes, ma'am. I piped him aboard on the 11th. I put him at the comm, under the comm rating's elbow. I told him to do what the comm rating told him. I told him not to lift his hand from the key. He didn't, ma'am. He held the key for the full burst. He died at his station. She had nodded once. She had folded her hands. She had walked with him to the lectern and taken her place at its side. The chaplain read the standard memorial of the lane service for a comm rating in training lost at his station in his first month of service. The yard chief held the salute. The long line of the company of mast yard held the salute. The senior bosun held the salute. At the end of the reading, when the yard chief gave the small nod that was the bosun's cue, the senior bosun took the bosun's pipe out of the inside pocket of his coat, and he piped the side for the boy, slowly, with the brass clean and the breath even. He held the last note for the count of 3 breaths. He let it die. He wound the cord. He set the pipe back in the inside pocket of his coat. He went to the side of the lectern. He waited. After a long count, the boy's mother lowered her hands. She turned to the senior bosun. Bosun, ma'am, your captain held the lane. Yes, ma'am. And my boy held the key. Yes, ma'am. He held the key for the full burst. He did not lift his hand. Then they are both home, bosun. Yes, ma'am. They are both home. She nodded once. She folded her hands again. She turned and walked across the apron, with the yard chief at her elbow, and the chaplain a half-pace behind, to the long gray hall of the receiving station, where the small steel urn would be set in its niche, under the names of the Company of the Times, Hark Weddell, beside the captains, and the executive officers, and the engineers, and the gun crews, and the cooks, and the medics, and the comm ratings the company that had held the lane for the Times Mera times on the 12th of Talvern at 1909 until 1914 plus 02 seconds. When the engineering bulkhead had failed, the senior bosun stood alone on the long pale apron in the cold gray afternoon. He looked out past the long, thin row of the lifters at their moorings, past the small, old commercial hull of the Times Mera Times at the far end of the row, out to the cold gray horizon of Telvin Station 11, where the inland sun was at last beginning, slowly, to fall. After a long time, when the apron had cleared, and the chaplain had carried his small portable lectern back to the chapel, and the long line of the company of mast yard had broken up to the evening mess, the senior bosun walked, alone, across the long pale apron of mast yard, to the foot of the gangway of the Times Mera. He stopped at the foot of the gangway. He set his cap, square, on his head. He took the bosun's pipe out of the inside pocket of his coat, and he held it in his left hand, with the cord wound tight, and the brass clean. He set the pipe at his lips. He piped the side for the Times Mera, in the long quiet count of the standard side pipe of the lane service. Slowly, with the brass clean, and the breath even, he held the last note for the count of 3 breaths. He let it die. He wound the cord. He set the pipe back in the inside pocket of his coat. He turned. He walked back across the apron, past the long, thin row of the lifters, at their moorings, to the gate of the yard. At the gate, the Marine in dress greens came to attention. The senior bosun returned the salute. He went out and along the long, pale road of the harbor quarter of Telvin Station 11, to the long, pale steps of the quarters of the Verity branch. And up the steps, and in. He went to his room. He closed the door. He hung the coat on the hook beside the cap. He set the bosun's pipe on the small steel table by the bed, with the cord wound tight and the brass clean. He sat on the edge of the bed with his hands flat on his knees. He thought of the captain at the helm at 1912 plus 03 seconds, with his hand on the helm and his quiet voice in the comm ratings earpiece. He thought of the boy at the comm with his hand on the burst key in the count of the burst. He thought of the engineers at the rails between the second hit and the failure of the bulkhead. He thought of the relay acknowledgement at 1912 plus 25. Hark Weddell hold the lane, Telvin relay. He thought of the third night of the long passage between Fenmark and Brennan in the year he came up to senior rate, and of Captain Vern Holm at the chart table with the cold cup of tea at his elbow, and the midshipman of 19 at the corner of the table, with his face very still in the dim. He thought of the long count of his rate. He thought of the bosun's pipe in the inside pocket of his coat, with the cord wound tight and the brass clean. The duty steward came at 2000 with the evening tray. He did not speak. He set the tray on the small steel table by the bed, beside the pipe. He went out. He did not slide the bolt. The inquiry was, in the long count of the morning sheet of the 18th, closed. The senior bosun was, in the long count of the evening of the 19th, a senior bosun of the lane service in transit between 2 postings, with a folded sheet in the inside pocket of his coat. Posting Senior Bosun Holcomb Vance, Tellurian Lane Service, reporting to Lane Station 8, on the 20th of Talvern, at 0800 for the relief of the senior bosun's billet of the picket cruiser Marethvel, presently outbound on the standard reinforcement vector. Standing order, 406, in effect. He had read the sheet once. He had folded it. He had set it in the inside pocket of his coat, against the bosun's pipe. He had not, in the long count of the evening, taken it out again. Outside, beyond the small port of the quarters, the long, thin row of the lifters at their moorings lay quiet at the long, pale apron of Telvin Station 11, with the stern lamps of the Times Mera Times lit at the far end of the row, and 1,028 of the souls of Kesson, on shore, in the receiving hall, alive. The morning shuttle to Lane Station 8 was at 0700. The senior bosun would be on it. He would take the bosun's pipe and the folded sheet and the long count of his rate and the standing order 406 in his coat against his ribs, and he would carry it the way the bosun had always carried it. The way the bosun would, in the long count of the centuries of the lane service, always carry it, in his coat, against his ribs, with the cord wound tight and the brass clean, and the captain's last order lodged, for keeping. In the long, quiet count of his breath, hold the lane.